Essentially, my point wasn't that you should divest on moral grounds from fossil fuels. It was simply saying that the binary outcome here, either we're going to transition away from fossil fuels fast enough to avert the sort of disastrous consequences of climate change that could quite easily lead to a collapse of civilization over the next 100, 150 years, maybe a lot earlier. But if we have a couple of billion people being displaced from where they live, if we have new diseases, if people can't work, that is just going to destroy civilization. So, that's one part of one outcome if we don't transition away from fossil fuels fast enough. The other outcome is, can we invest at scale in accelerating renewables so that not only do we have very cheap production of renewable energy, and solar energy is already much cheaper than fossil fuels to produce, but storing it and distributing it are issues that we haven't yet cracked. So can we invest in cheaper, more efficient ways of storing renewable energy and distributing it so that it's available on tap whenever you need it, wherever you are in the world? Because then no one will use fossil fuels unless there are incredibly hard to, what they describe as jargon, hard to abate activities. At the moment, that's seen as being things like air transportation and steel manufacture. But again, investing in green hydrogen, other technologies could accelerate our transition away from that very quickly. So the proposal in that article was really, look, you're either making a choice. If you carry on investing in fossil fuel companies, you're kind of backing a failed transition, because the fossil fuel companies might be worth investing in on a purely financial basis. If you think that we're going to blow through 2050, we're still going to be pushing out loads of carbon through fossil fuels, then, sure, you might make more money that way. But if we want and believe in a net zero, a carbon-free economy by 2050, then we really need to put our investment into getting there. And if we do get there, by the way, then that's going to make fossil fuel companies a terrible investment. So the principle of that argument was really, don't divest on moral grounds, divest because you want to put the money into the transition to carbon-free technologies. And if it's successful, then you'll make a lot of money and a lot of value will be destroyed in fossil fuel companies, and you'll have a sustainable future for you and future generations. Now, you asked about the other side of the equation, and there are some reasonable arguments, one of which is that we are going to need fossil fuels for some time to come, one of which is that it would be socially unjust to turn off fossil fuels straight away, and clearly that's a point which I think is true, but it's not dependent on this argument. The third one is, which I think is perhaps more difficult to argue against, is that if everyone who believes in sustainability divests from fossil fuel companies, then the only people left to own them are people who don't care about the environment, and so what motivation will they have to change? I mean, I still think they'll have motivation to change, because eventually there will be no fossil fuels being used. But it's also partly because of my own belief, and I may be wrong, been wrong about lots of things in the past, that very few of the big fossil fuel companies today are going to make that transition. I think they will disappear. There may be one or two in the market who are totally committed to a green future and will make it there. And I think it's not unreasonable to make exceptions. So I would divest from fossil fuels unless you really believe a company has a strategy and the resources and the people to make that transition rapidly. But I think they should be very transparent about saying, yes, we are investing in Ørsted or BP or whoever it may be, and this is why we believe they're making that transition. So I think when you make yourself transparent in that way, you make yourself accountable, and you can be challenged on the decisions you've made. And I think that's something else that needs to be brought into the investment and capital market chain, because that accountability requires people to do a better job.
Amazing. I'm probably going to ask you one last question,
Sure.
because you've got 10 minutes. I don't want to keep you late, but can you talk, how much evidence do we have for the risk-return profiles being positive for more sustainable and impact investments today than not? So when you're talking to a group of people who are managing assets on behalf of their clients, who are focused on that profit return. How much evidence could you share with us for a positive transition?
Okay, so I think here I'm going to kind of challenge the question, because I think, you know, there are liars, damned lies, and statistics, and I could find evidence which showed that investing in a sustainable way was better. Now, the reality is that the typical sort of sustainable investments had a pretty good run up until the beginning of this year, when oil prices went through the roof. And so if you weren't in oil, your short-term investment performance started looking poor relative to companies that were stuffed to the gills with oil companies. But I just think that's kind of irrelevant, because if we're looking at, you know, what's going to happen and investments you want to be making for the next 10, 20, 30 years, these sort of measures which are all based on 1 year, 2 years, 3 years are just irrelevant. The reality is that I think if you are good at identifying companies or opportunities that have products, that have a strategy that you believe in, and that have the people to implement the strategy and the financial resources to deliver it, then over long periods of time you will do better than people who just have general portfolios of everything. So if it's what I would describe as being long-term, high conviction, low turnover, and high engagement, so you stay connected to the company, to be talking to them, to understand what they're doing, and to be advising them and pressurizing them if necessary to behave in a sustainable way that's aligned to their mission and your investment.